Are you sure?
Here's the 30-second lesson on what legends know. Never ask a bride why she's getting married. Don't wear a skirt on a windy day. Deodorant is not a shower. Don't sniff chili flakes. And don't forget, saving is not investing. Legends don't just save, they invest in mutual funds. Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
For today, my offering to you is an episode of First Person Second Draft. You know that series where I occasionally talk about a big story I might have covered in the past, interactions with interesting people that I have had in the past, and how they become relevant now. When they become relevant now, or they come back in the news cycle, I talk about them with some current knowledge as well, while using current knowledge and context to update those earlier experiences. So this first person second draft is now about PV Narsimha Rao. I've spoken about him in the past also, but those were different contexts and different details. Why does he come back into our discussion and into our lives and in our minds today? That's because Modi government has approved a memorial dedicated to former President Pranab Mukherjee. You've seen Pranab Mukherjee's daughter. In fact, you will also see her interview with ThePrint. Neelam Pandey, my colleague, has interviewed her. You will see that interview. The center has approved a memorial dedicated to him, and as the center has done it, PV Narsimha Rao's grandson NV Subhash has attacked the Congress party, saying the party has consistently ignored its leaders who sacrificed entire lives for its benefit. After all, Narasimha Rao kept the Congress party in power for 5 full years. He also said, NV Subhash, Narasimha Rao's grandson, he also said, both Pranab Mukherjee and PV Narsimha Rao are stalwarts of Congress. The party would have fallen apart without them, and this is a slap on the face of the Congress. What is a slap on the face of the Congress? That it is the BJP that has approved a memorial for him, while the Congress had not even made a demand for it, as the Congress hasn't for PV Narsimha Rao. That's the reason he's talking about it. The memorial that the center has approved for Pranab Mukherjee will be located in Rashtriya Smriti Complex, situated in the Rajghat area. It is the same patch, say on the western banks of the Jamna, along which Rajghat, Mahatma Gandhi's memorial, then Shanti One for Jawaharlal Nehru, Shakti Sthal for Indira Gandhi, Vijay Ghat for Lal Bahadur Shastri, Sadaiv Atal for Atal Bihari Vajpayee. That's where all of these are located. That's where a dedicated piece of land has been set up for other memorials, and that is where Pranab Mukherjee will be given his pride of place as well. So Rao's family is asking, so what about PV Narsimha Rao? He was also a prime minister and a very consequential prime minister. In fact, in December, when Dr. Manmohan Singh passed away, the BJP and the Congress traded barbs over memorial space for Dr. Manmohan Singh. BJP had questioned the Congress and asked, why was PV Narsimha Rao not given the funeral he deserved? Not only that, even his body was not allowed to be brought into AICC. This is when UPA was in power and Manmohan Singh was Prime Minister. In fact, following that, Telangana Assembly passed a resolution seeking the Bharat Ratna for Manmohan Singh. Bharat Rashtra Samiti, that is BRS, and its leader KT Rama Rao urged the state government to also persuade the center to establish a memorial for PV Narsimha Rao in the national capital as well. So Narsimha Rao that way has come right back in the news cycle. That's the reason I say he's the apparition who refuses to go away. Now, depending on where you are on his politics, you can say he was a good man or a bad man, or he made a good contribution or not such a good contribution to Indian politics or the history of Indian governance or to national interest. You can be on one side or the other, but the fact is that he is persistent. In life and in politics, he was thick-skinned, but in death, he's been indelible. The more you think he's been forgotten, or his party in particular tries to make him forgotten, he keeps coming back. That's the reason I thought I will tell you a little bit more about my interactions with PV Narsimha Rao, because as I said just now, he was a very consequential prime minister. He was also a fascinating leader. PV Narsimha Rao, in fact, was the first serving Prime Minister of India that I got to meet one-on-one. And I had done very little to deserve that honor. It was one of those coincidences. In the course of an interview in Kabul in the winter of 1991, Najibullah, the Afghan dictator then, tapped me on the elbow. See those pictures on that screen of that interview? He tapped me on the elbow and asked through an interpreter, I am told you are an important person. Can you tell your Prime Minister, Mr. Rao, one important thing on my behalf? I was a mere reporter, I said. I am not so important. But Najim said mere reporters were not sent to the Afghan war 5 times in a year and that he had done his homework. Now, what homework he had done, I don't know, but if he thought so, so be it. Then he told me what he wanted conveyed to Rao, that he wouldn't trust his own ambassador with, and that he said our ambassador was not taking seriously. Now, salted away for your memoirs, I thought, I said to myself, but on my return, I did happen to mention this as a joke at a party to MJ Akbar, who was then very close to Narasimha Rao. He said, I must tell the Prime Minister. I laughed. I didn't know any Prime Minister well enough for me to call them. I had never met any Prime Minister one-on-one, so I just laughed. The next morning, there was a call from the Prime Minister's office and an audience was offered. Rao sat there slumped on his sofa, slurping at his porridge uninterestedly as grandfathers tend to do, but spraying on the napkin around his neck like this. I told him the story, the message laced with many apologies, that I did not know what business I had to be there, that I had no idea why Najib had chosen me for this and not our or his ambassador, or that I was possibly only being made a fool of. I said also that I told Najibullah that I am a reporter, I don't have any such stature, and I would like to now repeat that to our Prime Minister Narasimha Rao as well, that I feel so awkward and silly to be drawn into all this, and would he please keep what I said always to himself. He smiled, he patted his belly thrice because he was sprawling like this, crossed his arms and said, what goes in there stays there forever. This was still the winter of 1991. Narasimha Rao was still quite a new Prime Minister. Rao, in fact, was not one to take it so lightly. He took lots of notes with a lead pencil and then gave me a long discourse on the Afghan problem, a masterly analysis on complexities that emerge when tribalism and ethnicity clash with religion in the absence of a well-defined nationalism. What the message from Najibullah was, I have kept it for myself. In fact, I wrote an account of these conversations earlier in 2017, of which I will share a link with you, but then I had not mentioned what this message was, but now enough time has passed so I can mention it to you. Najibullah wanted a certain amount of money transferred by Government of India to some recipient in a Central Asian country. And what was that money meant for? That was to pay for the ammunition that his army needed desperately at that point of time. As I have reflected back on that conversation, almost 33 years back now, all these years, this keeps coming back to me, and I've always thought that no Indian Prime Minister except maybe Jawaharlal Nehru could have packed so much insight and intellect in a 30-minute discourse on so complex a problem. It's a bit sad to write this today when the entire country has forgotten him. His party is trying very hard to make sure you forget him. His grandson is fighting for a funeral for him. The fact is, he's our most vilified and deliberately misunderstood Prime Minister. I had written something similar also on the day he was convicted in the trial court, later acquitted. Everybody was cursing him then, and his party was using the lofty line of let the law take its own course. I had never seen the Congress party use that line when it came to anyone they truly regarded as their own. Not when Mrs. Gandhi, senior Mrs. Gandhi, Indira Gandhi, was disqualified for electoral malpractices by the Allahabad High Court. Her party had then called it a minor traffic offence. Not when Sanjay Gandhi was produced in courts to face so many cases of emergency excesses and corruption. Rao, in fact, was a bit philosophical about this. He said in a conversation, I think it was part of the Walk the Talk, two-part Walk the Talk that appeared on NDTV, अरे भाई कोई कहता है मैंने मुर्गी चुराई, कोई कहता है मुर्गी के अंडे, पर एक बात पे तो सब राजी हैं कि चोर तो मैं हूँ. Somebody says I stole chickens, others say I stole eggs, but one thing everybody agrees on, that I am a thief. That was his philosophical way of looking at this. Rao, in fact, was not the most accessible of prime ministers. He was also certainly the second most uncharismatic in our history after H.T. Devagowda. That takes some doing. But he was always on the job, always on the job. Much has been written about his shepherding of a very, very vulnerable India through the collapse of the Cold War, the opening of the economy, and the foreign policy. His masterful marginalization of Benazir Bhutto in the most virulent phase, in her most virulent phase, when Kashmir and Punjab were both on fire and, and a new one was being lit out of Ayodhya. This was when the Americans were constantly breathing down India's throat. We needed IMF bailouts, and the entire international human rights community had a single point focus: Kashmir. Who else could have decided to upgrade relations with Israel in that critical phase, but waited patiently for Yasser Arafat to come visiting New Delhi to make a formal announcement and get him to endorse it at a press conference the very same day. And it was all well organized. At Arafat's press conference, somebody asked him a question that India just decided to upgrade its relations with Israel. Do you think it's a good idea? And Arafat said something like, yes, because peace talks are going on. It's better to have India as a friend of the Palestinians on the table. Why should India be away? That's how smart Rao was. Rao's style, in fact, was so hopelessly understated as to amount to self-denial, which is no virtue for a politician. But his method was thorough and effective. Cynicism may have been his personal style statement, but what else could you have expected of somebody whose own party was unwilling to give him credit for what he was doing right? The biggest problem was, if he didn't want to, he told you nothing. As if any extra word he spoke would give a national secret away. Are we doing better than before in Kashmir? I once asked him. You see, we will do something, they will do something. What we get will always be a net of that, he said. Very helpful. I mumbled. Now the fact is that when Benazir was making all those nasty statements, Jagmohan ko hum jag mo han kar denge, she had said that at Muzaffarabad just before Narasimha Rao had taken over. And when she returned to power, she was fired. All those fiery speeches, threat of war with India were not able to save her that time. But she came back in 1993. Narasimha Rao was still there. In some interview, she was asked if she saw any hope of making progress with India now or resuming talks. And she said something like, when the Gandhis were in power, they were people of class. You could go and relate to them. You could talk to them. Now they have this person. We don't know. It was quite an elitist response. And we could see that Narasimha Rao did not like it one bit. And he told people around him, and he also mentioned it to me in a conversation, that I will make a horrible example of her. And the fact is that Kashmiri insurgency as the Punjab insurgency were both destroyed under his watch. And they were destroyed quite conclusively at that point of time. His tenure ended in 1996. 3 years later, the war came in Kargil. It was during the peak of the Kargil war that I dropped by one afternoon. The politicians really love you when they are out of power and ignored by everybody, particularly by their own parties, and you seek time with them. Then they are very generous and their minds and hearts also open up and they talk a bit more also. With the Kargil war going on and at that point not going very well for India in the early stages, I dropped by one afternoon for a few words of wisdom from the old man. How would this old fox have handled a crisis like this? Would he have buckled under? Would he have escalated the war, crossed the LOC? I went, therefore, for yet another lesson or tutorial in Narasimha Rao's art of crisis management. This is when he opened up a bit more on what he did the day Babri Masjid fell. I wrote about this in detail in a piece on the 25th anniversary of the demolition of the Babri Masjid. The piece was headlined, and I will share a link with you with the description. The piece was headlined, Narasimha Rao felt betrayed over Babri. He avenged it by trapping L.K. Advani in Hawala scandal. What was his explanation? He said, people wanted me to impose the president's rule. I could have imposed the president's rule in Uttar Pradesh, immediately dismiss the government and impose the president's rule. But president's rule means you have to find advisors. Advisors have to go and take over on behalf of the central government. Until then, that takes at least 24 hours. Even if you fast forward it, it will take several hours for these people to go in and take over. By that time, whatever is happening in Ayodhya will keep on happening, and you will not even be able to hold the BJP government accountable. And that is the reason he did not dismiss it right then. And then he said, look, I could have ordered the CRP to open fire. But think about it. This is India. People who were going out to bring down the mosque, what is it that they were chanting? They were chanting the name of Bhagwan Ram, Lord Ram, and human beings, which is the troops of my paramilitary forces are, when they would have opened fire to kill people, whose name would they be chanting? Because it's not easy to kill people, open fire and kill people. They'll also be chanting Lord Ram's name. And suppose they had gotten together, what kind of a crisis India would have faced? That would have lit a fire that nobody would have been able to control. So I thought, all right, if I have to take this down by myself, if this blame has to go with me to my funeral pyre, so be it. We talked about some of the other crises that he handled. How he handled the situation when the news of the burning of Charare-Sharif Shrine in Kashmir came, on how he swung the settlement of the siege of Hazratbal, and on the way the rules of engagement with terrorists were evolved in Punjab and Kashmir. If among the few sympathizers in the courtroom on the day of his sentencing in that corruption case, you saw KPS Gill, he actually was present in the courtroom on the day of the sentencing of Narasimha Rao, you can draw your own conclusions. In fact, KPS Gill's family had a memorial meeting for him on his 90th birth anniversary just about a couple of weeks back, and I had the honor of being invited to speak there. Now, KPS Gill was there as a man of honor with Narasimha Rao because he knew what Narasimha Rao had done to bring normalcy back to Punjab. And that tells us, KPS Gill's presence there tells us that not all men are so devoid of a sense of honor as the usual congressman. This is no political obituary of Narasimha Rao, nor is this any time to write obituaries because obituaries were written a long time back. He died more than 20 years ago. You will learn a lot more on him from Binay Sitapati's biography, Half Lion, published by Penguin in 2016. What I'm sharing with you, the set of experiences in this episode of First Person Second Draft, what I'm sharing with you is merely to underline this fascinating life which achieved so much in 5 impossible years and died so friendless. And this is nothing to do with any moral outrage over his corrupt ways, because doodh ka dhula kaun hai? Who is it that is totally non-corrupt in our public life? Rao was punished by the middle class for keeping the BJP out of power for a full 5 years, 1991 to 1996. Why else would the middle class hate someone who gave them so much through economic reforms? Similarly, he was punished by the Congress party for keeping the Gandhi family out of power, for daring to believe that he could lead the Congress party and keep it in power, whatever the cost, in the absence of conviction, and later did not even allow his body to be brought into its headquarters. Now, in conclusion, I can say one thing. Congress party will do nothing for Narasimha Rao. But chances are that the BJP at some point is going to embrace him. And when they embrace him and they set up a memorial for him, maybe even give him a posthumous Bharat Ratna, chances are that the Congress party would say, "Theek hai na, he was always an RSS BJP man." In fact, they used to say he has khaki chaddies under his dhoti, right? And that he secretly celebrated the pulling down of the Babri Masjid. That was a canard that the Congress party spread for a very long time. It might still happen. However, remember that the one landmark named is in his name. Next time you go to Hyderabad, check it out. From Hyderabad, as you come to the airport, the highway, the expressway that connects Hyderabad city to the airport, that's named after PV Narsimha Rao. And who had named it after PV Narsimha Rao? When I noticed it for the first time, I thought it might have been done by Chandrababu Naidu or maybe later by KCR, by his TRS then, which is now BRS. It was in fact named after Narasimha Rao by YS Rajshekar Reddy, the Congress Chief Minister of the state then. So whatever the Congress High Command might have thought of him, Rajshekar Reddy or YSR understood what he meant for Telugu people.